For those of you taking GIT physiology, this video is purposely for you. In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at the regulation of gastric acid secretion, which is an essential process for proper digestion. I would like to make everything as easy as possible. So let's dive in. But before then, here are things which you need to know. Since the gastric acid secretion is basically to ensure smooth digestion, so let's take a very quick revision on the process of digestion. Notice that the process of digestion basically starts from the mouth. Here we have the mouth, then we have the tongue and salivary gland. So the food particles will move from the mouth, passing all these stages down to the esophagus, which is in the throat. From the esophagus, it moves down to the stomach, and this is the stomach. From the stomach, it moves down to the small intestine. Close to the small intestine, we have these two important organs, which is the liver and the pancreas. And notice that the pancreas have both endocrine function and exocrine function. And it also produces two hormones, which is the insulin and glucagon. So, and here we have the liver, which help in excretion. So from the small intestine, it moves up to the down to the large intestine. And notice that the large intestine have three colons, which is the ascending colon, the transverse colon, and here we have the descending colon. And inferiorly, we have the rectum and the anus. So basically, we have the rectum before the anus. So from the large intestine, it will move down here, then here. So this is it. This is briefly a recap for the process of digestion. Now let's go back to the gastric acid secretion. So I need you to understand that the gastric acid secretion is totally controlled by neural and hormonal mechanism, just in order to ensure smooth digestion and efficient without damaging itself. This mechanism regulates the release of gastric juice, which contain hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes. And this regulation occurs in three distinct phases with both stimulatory and inhibitory. The word inhibitory meaning blocking. So it has phases like the cephalic phase, also known as the reflex phase, and we also have the gastric, as the name suggests, gastric, that has to do with the stomach, and we have the intestinal phase. Notice that the cephalic phase, which is known as the reflex phase, this basically happens before the food enters into the stomach. And here we have the gastric. This happens when the food reaches the stomach. And we have the intestinal phase. This happens when partially digested food moves to the duodenum. And we said the small intestine basically have three different parts, which is DJI, which is the duodenum, jejunum, and here we have the ileum. So now we are talking about the intestinal phase, which is this. Notice that the intestinal phase happens when partially digested food move into the duodenum. Notice that the cephalic phase, which is the first one, is triggered by sight, smell, taste, or touch of food. What about the gastric? So, but before we talk about the gastric, we really need to understand the mechanism of how the cephalic phase works. And you should keep in mind and also remember that the cephalic phase, we call it the reflex phase. So looking at the mechanism of the cephalic phase, let's label this first. Here we have the control center, also known as the brain. And here we have the brain stem. But specifically what we are looking at is the medulla. Because that is where we found the attachment of the vagus nerve, the medulla. That is what we want to focus on. And this guy here is called the vagus nerve, which is the main nerve for parasympathetic nervous system. Sometimes you can also call it the vagal nerve. So here we have the stomach actually, not the intestine. And inside, we can call this to be our food particles. So, and this is the lining of the stomach. And notice that on the lining of the stomach, okay, let's write it completely, of the stomach. And on the lining of the stomach, we have these cells called the parietal cells. If you could remember on our previous video on the hydrochloric acid secretion, which we talk about these parietal cells, reaction inside these parietal cells which convert carbon dioxide and water into the bicarbonate and hydrogen ion. So hydrogen ion have to move from the circulation combined with the chloride from the bloodstream. Then this will give us the hydrochloric acid. So, but for this case, we are focusing on the regulation of gastric acid secretion. So here we have the brain. And notice that this brain activates the vagus nerve. And we said the vagus nerve is the main nerve for the parasympathetic nervous system. So immediately when this vagus nerve is activated, it will send a signal to the parietal cell in the stomach lining to start producing hydrochloric acid. In case you want to understand how this production of hydrochloric acid happens, I'm going to drop a link down below in the description section. But I will give you a very quick review on how it happened. So we're going to have hydrogen ion here, and chloride ion will come from the bloodstream. When they combine, they form the HCl, and HCl is the hydrochloric acid. So we are done with the cephalic phase. And if you could remember, we said the cephalic phase is the reflex. It happens before the food enters into the stomach. We are done with cephalic phase. We can move into the gastric phase. To understand this gastric phase, there are things which I really need you to understand. On our previous video, we talked about some receptors which are found in the GIT. We have the mechanoreceptors, we have the chemoreceptors, and we have the osmoreceptors. The osmoreceptors, mechano, chemo, and then the osmo. This control the chemical movement, and this mechanical movement. And here we have the osmolarity, that is the concentration of water. So, because the gastric phase has to do with the, the stretch receptors, which is the mechanoreceptors. And notice that, as we said earlier, we said the gastric phase, this phase starts with food enters into the stomach. Typically, it has to last for 3 to 4 hours. First of all, let's say inside of this stomach, we have these stretch receptors in green, which we call them the mechanoreceptors. Notice that the distension of the stomach wall triggers these stretch receptors, which is known as the mechanoreceptors, and it activates the vagus nerve. To activate it, let's put plus. And at the same time, in the lining of the stomach, we have this special cell, which we call them the G cell. So when we have the distension of the stomach wall, we are going to have the protein, which are in the food. What they will do, they will stimulate the release of the gastrin, which is a hormone produced by this particular G cell. And notice that we said this G cell is found in the lining of the stomach. So the protein, I will repeat, we said the protein, when we have the distension of the stomach wall, right? Protein inside the food would stimulate the release of gastric acid. Gastric acid from where? Basically from the G cell. So where do we find this G cell? We also find them in the lining of the stomach. So what about, this is the stimulatory event. What about the inhibitory event? For the inhibitory part, let's say if the pH in the stomach drop down to 2, meaning it's too acidic, so negative feedback will occur to reduce simply to reduce the acid production, which basically happen in the lining of the stomach. So let's look at the intestinal phase. Let's write it. Intestinal phase. So here is something which I need you to understand. Also in this intestinal phase, we have this stimulatory event that happen. And we also have the inhibitory event that happen inside this. So, but before then, that is also something which I need you to understand, which is the partially digested food. We call it the chyme. Let's start with the stimulatory event that happened. So notice that initially the presence of acid chyme stimulates the intestinal wall, simply to produce hormones like the intestinal gastrin, which briefly enhance the gastric acid secretion. Now for the inhibitory event, notice that when the duodenum become too or full of acid hormones such as the secretin and the CCK, also known as the cholecystokinin, will be released. So these hormones inhibit the gastric acid secretion and slow down the stomach emptying to prevent overloading the small intestine. So this is it for this problem. Notice that the cephalic phase get the stomach ready with the brain help. Then the gastric phase is the main acid production stage, which is triggered by the food in the stomach. Then the intestinal phase, which slows the acid production to protect the intestine and regulate digestion. By regulating the gastric acid secretion in these three phases, the body ensures digestion happens efficiently and safely. I hope you find this very helpful. Please, if you do, just do me a favor by hitting on the subscribe button. Thank you for watching and see you next time. For those of you taking GIT physiology, this video